So with our last tutorial, we talked about how to create shadows for a noonday sun where the shadow is being cast at a 90-degree angle. In this example, we're going to discuss when you have a sun sort of in the midday morning or late afternoon where the sun is not at a perfect 90 degrees, perhaps at 45 or at 270, and it creates a casting shadow with your object. So we're going to open up a file I've given you. It's in the show notes. It's called college. So we have a nice little college campus area here. And we're going to put a student into our area, a diligent student, of course. So I have a file called student. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select our student and bring it into our other composition. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a technique where I'm going to select the background using the magic wand tool. The reason why I'm going to do that is the background is a nice solid color, and I'm just going to use a magic wand with a low tolerance, and then we're going to inverse it to select our foreground object. So here I've selected everything except for our character, so I'm going to go to select and then inverse. And you can see that we got pretty much most of our character. We have a little bit extra here, and we kind of lost a little bit of the laptop here. So we're actually going to go back with another tool and clean this up. Second tool we're going to use is underneath the magic wand tool, and it's called the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool basically allows you to make selections by painting. So if you use a paintbrush to paint in a selection, that's kind of how it works. So you can set up what kind of paintbrush you want to use. I recommend using something that's not too big, not too small, depending on the size of your document. I'm going to go and I'm going to select the thing that looks kind of like a magic marker with a plus sign. This is the add to selection. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of very softly kind of clean up this area here. So I'm getting in the sort of the top of the laptop. There we go. So that's pretty good. Now I'm going to try to subtract some of this extra white shadow here. And I'm going to do that by selecting the Quick Select Subtraction tool, which is next to the Add tool. It has a minus sign on it. And I'm just going to very lightly paint that in. So there we go. Cleaned up my edges very nicely. I'm going to copy this character by holding Command C or Control C if you have a PC. Paste. There's my character. He's pasted into my scene. So once again, we're kind of getting the halo effect like we did in the last composition, which kind of makes him look a little bit like a sticker on top of a picture. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of fade out the edges. So what we're going to do is similar to what we did in the last example. So I'm going to right-click or control-click on the layer with my character in it, and control-click on the little thumbnail, and I'm going to go down to select pixels, and that's going to select my object here. And I'm going to go to layer, and we're going to add a layer mask, and we're going to use the option that says reveal selection. And what that did is it automatically made a nice layer mask for me where my character that was selected became white or visible, and the background became black or invisible. Now what we're going to do is we're going to apply a Gaussian blur to this mask so it kind of smudges the edges and makes the edges a little semi-transparent, which is going to help sort of blend a little bit better into the background. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian or Gaussian, depending on who you talk to. And when it's at 0, you see how I'm getting these really crisp lines, and he doesn't really look like he exists in the scene. He kind of looks like a sticker or, like one of those collages that your little sister makes. What we're going to do is kind of just soften the edges just by kind of increasing the radius. So I'm going to choose maybe like a 4.5, something like that. Hit OK. So now he's a little bit better. He's not perfect, but we'll fix him a little bit later. So now that he sits in our scene here, he doesn't, really look like he exists within this scene. And part of it is that he's not really casting any shadow. If the sun, which is coming from this direction here, should be casting a shadow that's coming towards the camera. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a shadow for our character here. So before we do that, I'm just going to rename this layer student. And I'm going to duplicate this layer. I can duplicate it either by using Command J, or you can also click and drag a layer to the add new layer option. That'll also automatically copy a layer. And what we're going to do is I'm going to rename this shadow. I'm going to turn off the student layer for now because I don't need it. First thing I want to do is we're going to apply this layer mask to our object. So I'm going to control click or right click on the layer mask and hit apply layer mask. Next thing I'm going to do is we're going to make this look like a shadow, we're going to have to make it something other than, this kind of color. We're going to make it fully black. So to do that, we're going to go down to our layer styles, and we're going to choose color overlay. And under the options, we're going to change this to black, pure black, or 00000. Okay, pretty good. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to apply this effect to the layer, the color overlay to the actual character, because it actually doesn't really exist, and this can actually affect some of the other things we're going to do. So to apply this color overlay to the character permanently, what we're going to do is we're going to add a new layer below the shadow layer, and then highlight both layers by holding down the Shift key, and I'm going to use Command E to merge, or Control E. And now I've just merged my layer style with my shadow layer. So now they're both combined, which will make it easier for us to work. So my shadow looks a little weird here, partly because it's a little too crisp. What we're going to do is we're going to, once again, blur the edges. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, or Gaussian Blur. Ramp up the blur a little bit, maybe about 9 or something. Looks pretty good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Vertical. And we're going to turn back our student layer on. And actually we should put the shadow layer below the student. And we're going to position the shadow so that it's coming right from the tip of our character. So it looks a little bit better. But the shadow kind of looks weird. Like, it doesn't really look like it's being cast. It kind of looks like this weird reflection. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to use a distortion tool to distort the shadow to make it look a little bit more realistic. So we're going to go to, with the shadow layer selected, we're going to go to Transform and then Distort. And this option basically allows me to pull and stretch the shadow. So I'm going to kind of pull it, and I'm going to kind of pull it in a sort of an angle. So it's kind of being cast to sort of a direction here. So in this case, the sunlight's coming from the upper left and kind of casting the shadow in the sort of lower right. And you can play around until you get something that looks kind of what you want. When you're done, hit the return key. And the shadow's a little bit too strong, so I'm going to have to lower the opacity, maybe to about 50 or so. So looking a little bit better. The last thing I'm going to do is I want to, just like in the last example, when you have a shadow, especially a cast shadow, the strongest or the heaviest part of the shadow is always nearest to the object from which the shadow is being cast. So the darkest area should be here, and then it should sort of fade out a little bit until it kind of becomes invisible. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply a layer mask. So I'm going to go to Layer, Layer Mask, Reveal All. It's going to give me a white layer mask here. And I'm going to go to the Gradient tool. And make sure that your colors are set to white and black. And I'm going to click on the gradient creation, and just make sure that your gradient's going from white to black. you can reset the colors by playing around with the stops, changing colors around. Then hit OK. So I have my gradient, and this time, instead of using the radial, I'm going to use the linear gradient option, which is the first one. I'm going to start from the beginning of the shadow, which is about sort of underneath my character, and just kind of drag out. And you can kind of play around with it, but you kind of, what you want really is where the main part of him is thicker, and then it kind of gets a little bit fainter as it goes on. So by having this sort of faintness, it kind of creates this illusion that the shadow is kind of fading out over time. And now that I've done that, I want to maybe go back to my student, tidy up. There's a little bit of a shadow here. You can just grab the smudge tool. So what I'm just doing is kind of just softening this sort of halo effect, just so it doesn't look like he's sort of a cardboard cutout or something like that. And play around with the shadow a little bit more, make it a little bit. Make sure it lines up nicely. And from this case, I'm gonna put mine inside of a group, and I could, shrink it. Place my character. The reason I'm shrinking it is it was a little bit too large to sort of sit in this scene, but now it looks about more right. So there you go. How to make a shadow for basically any object just by duplicating it and coloring it black and basically smudging it around. Thanks for watching the Personal Online Tutor podcast. If you have any suggestions for tutorials or techniques you'd like to learn, please email them to personalonlinetutor@gmail.com. For more tips and techniques, follow us on Twitter at personalontutor. To learn more about online classes in Adobe Photoshop or personal tutoring in Adobe Photoshop, please visit personalonlinetutor.com.